Welcome back to our studios here in Lahore. I'm Hamza Amjad. Now, Pakistan has called on the United Nations to take measures to ease the humanitarian crisis in occupied Kashmir. Speaking to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India has imposed a communications blackout in the occupied valley. Guterres said the UN is monitoring the situation and will play its role to resolve the Kashmir issue.
In a bid to highlight the plight of millions of Kashmiris living under siege since August the 5th, Pakistan is reaching out to the international community. Addressing a press conference in Islamabad, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said the situation in Kashmir is deteriorating with every passing day. Qureshi said that by not allowing an opposition delegation to enter Kashmir, the Indian government has shown its true colors.
The way they were treated, arrested, and deported, put on the next flight back to Delhi. That, I categorically said, has exposed the true face of this government. They claim to be a democratic government, but their actions in reality are fascist in nature.
Qureshi said New Delhi's illegal actions in the occupied valley has jeopardized regional peace and stability. He called on the UN chief to intervene and prevent any demographic change in occupied Kashmir.
His organization has a responsibility to intervene and oppose the democratic restructuring, the changes that they want to bring about, because that is in line with the Security Council resolutions.
Qureshi invited the UN chief to visit Azad Kashmir and see the situation for himself.
A delegation led by former Congress Party chief Rahul Gandhi, who wanted to see the on-ground situation in occupied Kashmir, has been sent back from the airport. Earlier, in an effort to hide its atrocities against Kashmiris, Indian government asked opposition leaders not to visit the occupied valley. The Congress Party asked what the Modi government is trying to hide if things are normal in the disputed territory. It also condemned the communications blackout. India stripped occupied Kashmir of its special status on August the 5th and placed the valley under a crushing curfew. While India's illegal move to change the special status of Kashmir has drastically affected people's lives throughout the disputed territory, to distract international attention away from its indefinite round-the-clock curfew in occupied Kashmir, India has continuously shelled areas near the line of control. More in this report.
Indian aggression against Kashmiris is being felt on both sides of the line of control. Unprovoked cross-border firing by Indian occupation forces has destroyed homes, schools and hospitals in Azad Kashmir. The people there live under constant threat.
Over there, a curfew has been imposed and people suffer only if they violate the curfew. For us, we are not allowed to have any peace while sleeping, getting up, going to school, going to hospital, running our shops. We want to carry on with life normally, but we cannot do so.
The total communications blackout imposed on occupied Kashmir by India has also had a huge impact on people on the other side of the line of control.
The Indian government has closed all internet systems. For the past 18 to 20 days, no one has had any contact with anyone across the border. Everyone is extremely worried, especially all those on this side who have close relatives on that side.
Agitated by India's unprovoked aggression, the people of Azad Kashmir have become increasingly angry.
By God, I am so agitated that I want to go to Jammu and Kashmir and Srinagar because I see and hear the news daily. And I wonder why those people do not have knives and guns and rifles. If they have arms and they are not restricted to their houses, they will fix Modi.
India is under mounting international pressure to reduce tensions with Pakistan and reverse its illegal annexation of occupied Kashmir.
Pakistan and Chinese air forces have started their annual joint exercise called the Shaheen 8 in northwest China. This is the 8th exercise of its kind between the two countries since it was first launched in 2011. The Chinese Defense Ministry says the drills will improve training standards of the two air forces. Islamabad says this will also enhance close relations between the two countries. Russia has test-fired 2 ballistic missiles from nuclear-powered submarines in the Arctic Ocean and Barents Sea. The Defense Ministry said the tests are part of combat training. The missiles hit targets at training grounds in the northern Arkhangelsk region and on the Kamchatka Peninsula in eastern Russia. The 45th annual G7 summit will start today in France. Leaders of the world's leading economies are meeting to shape a response to global challenges. The host, President Emmanuel Macron, says he wants member states to focus on the issues of gender inequality, education and climate change. Macron has called for the fires in the Amazon rainforest to lead the summit agenda, calling them an international crisis. He has invited EU officials and leaders from Asia, Africa and Latin America to join the G7 for a global push on these issues. The leaders will also address the escalating trade war between the US and China, the Iran nuclear deal and unrest in Hong Kong. In France, 9,000 anti-G7 protesters have joined a mass march across the French-Spanish border. The world leaders arrived for a summit in Biarritz hours after the activists clashed with police. Anti-capitalist activists, environmentalists and other anti-globalization groups have begun flocking to the southwestern French town of Biarritz. Waving thousands of flags, they marched across the Bidassoa River, chanting slogans calling for taking action for climate. France has deployed 13,000 police personnel to secure the event amid fears of disturbance by anti-capitalist groups. Yemen's southern separatists have declared a ceasefire after 2 days of fighting with government forces in Shabwa province. In a statement, the Southern Transitional Council says all parties should exercise restraint and abide by the ceasefire. The council called on its forces to retain control of the institutions and the territory they have seized. The separatist leadership warned against any attacks on Saudi-led coalition forces. The separatists seized the southern port city of Aden earlier this month and last week extended their control to neighboring Abyan. A Turkish US joint operations center, which was meant to oversee a safe zone in northeast Syria, has started functioning in Turkey. Syrian Kurds say they will support the implementation of the US and Turkey deal. Turkey and the United States had agreed to set up a joint operations center along Syria's northeastern border to oversee the safe zone's creation. Turkey says a US general and a Turkish counterpart will command the center. A buffer zone between the Turkish border and Syrian areas is controlled by the Kurdish People's Protection Units. Syrian Kurds have established an autonomous region in northeast Syria during the country's 8-year war. In Syria, a car bomb explosion has killed 2 people and wounded 11 others in rebel-held Idlib city. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said a car blew up in the Al-Qusur neighborhood. Meanwhile, Syrian government airstrikes have hit rebel positions in the outskirts of Idlib. Earlier, Syrian forces recaptured the strategic town of Khan Sheikhoun after days of intense fighting. Now, Turkey says its forces have launched Operation Claw 3 against Kurdish militants in northern Iraq. Turkey's defense ministry says the operation was launched to provide border security and destroy militant positions in areas around the Duhok governorate. It says 40,000 people have been killed by militants in the last 30 years. China has urged the United States to stop its wrong practice of imposing additional tariffs on Chinese goods. The statement comes after US President Donald Trump announced that Washington will impose an additional 5% duty on Chinese goods. In a statement, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce said additional tariffs undermine the multilateral trading system and the international trade order. It further warned the United States of consequences if it does not end its wrong actions. Trump imposed additional tariffs on Chinese goods after Beijing unveiled retaliatory tariffs on $75 billion worth of imports from the US. Now, South Korea's military says North Korea has test-fired 2 more short-range ballistic missiles off its east coast. This is the 7th missile test conducted by North Korea in a month. Expressing concern, Seoul's National Security Council urged Pyongyang to refrain from acts that raise military tensions. South Korea's military said it is tracking movements in the north to watch for more launches. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has said he has a good relationship with North Korea's leader, despite nuclear talks being stalled since June.
Kim Jong-un has been, pretty straight with me, I think. And we're going to see what's going on. We're going to see what's happening. He likes testing missiles, but we never restricted short-range missiles. We'll see what happens.
In Hong Kong, riot police have fired tear gas and baton-charged protesters as a standoff in a working-class district descended into violence. Thousands of demonstrators wearing hard hats and gas masks marched through the industrial Kwun Tong area. Breaking an uneasy calm that lasted several days, the protesters retaliated with a barrage of stones, bottles and bamboo poles. The face-off underscored a dangerous deadlock in the city as demonstrators stubbornly refused to leave the streets. The protest started in June against a proposed law allowing extradition to China, but have led to wider calls for democracy and police accountability. Last Sunday, hundreds of thousands marched peacefully in the city to protest against the recent violence. In Indonesia, 4 people have been killed and another 33 went missing after a passenger ferry caught fire off the coast of Java. Rescue officials say 245 people have been rescued. The ferry was traveling from the city of Surabaya to Balikpapan on the island of Borneo with 280 people on board. The cause of the fire is yet to be determined. Sri Lanka has ended the state of emergency imposed after the Easter Sunday terrorist attacks in April. Sri Lanka's military says the withdrawal of the emergency signifies the return of calm to the country. The emergency law gave security forces extensive powers to detain and interrogate suspects without court orders. Over 250 people were killed and more than 500 wounded in the attacks on churches and hotels in Colombo. The state of emergency has lasted for 4 months, since a series of suicide bombings at churches and tourist hotels killed scores of people. Brazil has ordered its armed forces to help fight a record number of forest fires in the Amazon. The order comes after growing international anger over the country's environmental crisis. President Jair Bolsonaro authorized the deployment of soldiers in nature reserves, indigenous lands and border areas in the region. Earlier, French President Emmanuel Macron threatened to block a European Union trade deal with South American states, including Brazil. But German Chancellor Angela Merkel opposed scrapping the agreement, saying it is not an appropriate response. The EU is Mercosur's second largest trading partner. A supertanker aircraft dumped thousands of gallons of water over Bolivia's raging wildfires, which have already burned more than 650,000 hectares. The Bolivian authorities hired the Boeing supertanker 747 firefighting plane in a last-ditch effort to tame the blaze. Santa Cruz province, which is currently in flames, is a critical area for agriculture and cattle rearing. Authorities say they are still trying to determine the cause of the fires. Thousands of fires are also decimating the Brazilian Amazon, which is the world's largest rainforest. The World Health Organization says the year-long Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo has killed nearly 2,000 people. It says 80 new cases were confirmed last week. WHO Executive Director Michael Ryan says the situation remains serious, but he does hope that the high number of cases will begin to drop. Ryan says the WHO now has vaccines and effective therapeutics that can change the direction of the Ebola epidemic. This comes after a breakthrough trial for two drugs showed a survival rate of 90%.
It's continued at a substantial but stable transmission intensity for the past 10 weeks. Since mid-June, we've observed approximately 80 new confirmed cases per week. Cases over the last 2 to 3 weeks have started to reduce, and we hope this trend will continue.
Now, tracing their lineage, Jamestown Rediscovery Foundation aims to find the first African slaves who came to North America. This region was the first permanent English settlement and later became a part of the United States.
The organization digs through what traces remain of the first slaves to land in North America 400 years ago. Originally from the kingdom of Ndongo in what is now Angola, a woman named Angela was loaded onto a Portuguese ship in Luanda. After a terrifying Atlantic crossing, Angela was one of the first African slaves known to reach what is now the United States. The rolling green landscape, which gently slopes towards the James River, is likely to be the one the African slaves first saw when they arrived in August 1619.
The site behind me here is the site where Angela lived, and we're digging square after square on a grid system that was established by the Park Service in the 1930s. And every time we dig, we just take layer after layer down and hopefully get to that 1619 period. And if we find something, then we just open up the squares next to it.
At the time, Portuguese and Spanish slave traders had already been selling Africans as laborers in the Americas for nearly a century. Almost a third of the slaves died on the voyage from Africa because conditions on board ship were so bad. The enslaved Africans arrived shortly after settlers founded the first local legislature on July 30th, 1619, which marks the beginning of a dark period of US history. 250 years of slavery, followed by a long period of racial segregation. The struggle for equal rights continues to this day.
Inequality is so striking even today that has its roots in what began here hundreds of years ago. That's something we need to be aware of to tackle it.
They believe the more data they gather and discourses they arrange, the easier it would be to break with the insidious legacy of the past.
US health authorities have reported the first known death directly caused by vaping. A hospital in Illinois says the patient died after developing a severe respiratory disease. Illinois' Chief Medical Officer Jennifer Layden says the deceased was hospitalized with an unexplained illness after using e-cigarettes. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention says it is investigating a mystery lung disease outbreak linked to vaping. The CDC says it has identified 193 potential cases in 22 U.S. states since June. Welcome back. Now, first up in the world of business, European Council President Donald Tusk has warned that America's escalating trade skirmishes with China and Europe can land the world economies in a recession. After arriving in France for a G7 summit, Tusk also said it is hard to imagine the bloc ratifying its trade pact with South America's trade alliance, Mercosur. This comes as Brazil seemingly fails to curb fires ravaging the Amazon rainforest. Tusk says the European Union is ready to offer financial help to battle the inferno. Earlier, French President Emmanuel Macron said the G7 should hold emergency talks on the Amazon fires. European leaders are using the summit to push for action against fires in the Amazon, despite the Brazilian president complaining of external interference. International financial markets have taken a big hit following the latest escalation of the trade war between the US and China. Wall Street indices led by the tech-heavy Nasdaq sunk by up to 3% after Beijing and Washington exchanged tariff hikes. Stock markets in France and Germany also lost more than 1%. Oil prices plunged 2.5% on fears that the trade war escalation could push the global economy into recession. Investors looking for a safe haven have piled their money into precious metals, boosting the prices of gold and silver by 2%. Now, Chinese technology giant Huawei says that US trade restrictions' impact on its businesses will be smaller than initially feared. However, the restrictions could lower revenue from the company's smartphone unit by $10 billion just this year. Huawei's $100 billion business has been hit hard since mid-May after Washington put it on a blacklist. The restrictions have barred Huawei from using essential US components and technology. At a news conference in Shenzhen, Huawei Deputy Chairman Eric Tsu said the sales crisis has improved. Previously, company sales had fallen by 40%. In the English Premier League, Chelsea have beaten Norwich 3-2 in a match at Carrow Road. Tammy Abraham scored a brace for Chelsea. Abraham gave the Blues an early lead against the newly promoted Norwich City in the 3rd minute. Just 3 minutes after the first goal, Todd Cantwell scored an equaliser for Norwich. Mason Mount added another for the Blues to make it 2-1, but it was cancelled again by Norwich frontman Teemu Pukki. Abraham again got his name on the scoresheet after cutting inside Norwich's defence, sealing the win. This is Frank Lampard's first win as Chelsea manager. Well, it's 31 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that was all I have from the news bulletin at the moment, but do stay tuned to Indus News for further updates. And as always, thanks for watching.